The front door exploded off its hinges, and before Jason Carter could even scream, masked men stormed in, slamming his pregnant wife face first onto the floor. His heart hammered against his ribs as he struggled beneath a boot, helpless to stop the chaos ripping through their home. And just when it seemed like nothing could save them, Jason remembered 5 words that could turn the entire nightmare upside down. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jason Carter and his wife Emily returned home under a velvet night sky, the air crisp with the first hints of approaching autumn. The glow from the porch light painted soft halos on the familiar brick of their modest 2-story home. It was the kind of house people dreamed of, safe, unremarkable, shielded by decades of trust in a neighborhood where strangers were rare, and crime was a whispered rumor, not a fact. Jason, still carrying the faint scent of wood-fired pizza and cheap wine, slipped his key into the lock, sharing a lazy smile with Emily, who playfully bumped his shoulder with hers. The lock turned, and then, in an instant, the world was obliterated. The front door didn't open. It disintegrated. A deafening bang, a surge of splinters, a blast of force that hurled Jason backward into the wall. For one suspended heartbeat, he couldn't process it. His mind, trained on logical equations and orderly outcomes, refused to accept the violent chaos unfurling before him. Men, clad in black from helmets to boots, stormed through the wreckage. Their movements were mechanical, aggressive, as if the place were already burning down and they were the only ones who could stop it. Jason's instincts screamed to grab Emily, to shield her, to do something, but before he could lift a finger, she was ripped away from him. Emily's scream shattered the paralysis. Jason watched, helpless, as one of the masked figures grabbed her by the shoulder and slammed her hard onto the floor. The sickening crack of her head hitting wood echoed louder than any shouted command. Her delicate hands scrambled at the floor, trying to find purchase, but another officer's knee pinned her mercilessly. Blood streaked across the polished oak, glinting crimson in the overhead light. Jason lunged forward, but a brutal shove from behind crushed him onto his stomach, the taste of dust and fear filling his mouth. A heavy boot ground between his shoulder blades, immobilizing him. He tried to shout, a word, a protest, anything, but the weight crushed the air from his lungs. Why? His mind screamed the question even as he struggled beneath the boot. Why us? The SWAT team moved like a machine, no questions, no hesitation. Their rifles swept across shelves of family photos, innocent tokens of a life Jason had built with patience and quiet pride. Their boots trampled over wedding albums and Emily's prenatal vitamins still sitting on the kitchen counter. Everything that had once been sacred was now just debris underfoot. Terror twisted into white-hot rage. Jason, normally the calmest man in any room, felt something primal stir inside him. A feral instinct to fight, to tear down every armored invader in his home. But logic, cold and sharp, flared just as brightly. They were armed, they were aggressive, and one wrong move could get them both killed. Still, he couldn't lie there. Not while Emily sobbed and bled and called his name. His heart was a war drum now, beating faster than thought. He clenched his fists against the floor, the only act of resistance left to him, as he stared at the chaos unfolding around him and vowed, whatever this was, whoever they thought he would find a way to end it. And it would start with surviving this night. He was terrified. And that terror, Jason realized, wasn't of Jason or Emily. It was the terror of making a fatal mistake. It hit Jason with brutal clarity. They had the wrong house. He tried to lift his head, gasping out the words, "It's not us. You're wrong." His voice cracked, raw with panic. No one listened. No one even paused. He and Emily weren't people to these men. They were paper targets, Silhouettes in a training exercise gone horribly, grotesquely real. Somewhere deeper in the house, another voice roared, distorted through a radio. "We're looking for Malcolm Reyes. Confirm ID." The name meant nothing to Jason. It could have been a name ripped from a TV show for all he knew. He shook his head violently, fighting against the pressure at his back. "That's not us!" he screamed, his voice breaking the rhythm of shouted orders and heavy footsteps. "My name is Jason Carter. You're wrong." No one responded. No one even glanced down. And something inside Jason cracked. A clean, final break. His anger, sharp and unmanageable before, now took on a molten, focused shape. Hatred. Not just for the masked men smashing through his memories. Not just for the one who hurt Emily, but for the whole invisible machine that made this nightmare possible. A system that sent armored men into innocent homes, armed to the teeth, without listening, without verifying, without caring. Pinned there, tasting blood at the corner of his mouth, Jason felt a thought burn itself into his mind with terrifying force. If I don't end this, Emily, and our unborn child might not survive tonight. Desperation clawed at him, but so did something fiercer, a grim, cold determination. He couldn't afford another mistake. Every second wasted was another second closer to a tragedy he couldn't undo. He needed to act. Now. Every survival instinct Jason Carter had was screaming at him to fight, to lash out, to protect the battered woman sobbing somewhere behind him. But his mind, sharp, trained for clarity under pressure, gripped something even stronger than rage. Strategy. Pinned beneath the suffocating weight of the officer's knee, Jason clawed through the haze of terror for anything that could shift the odds. And then it came to him. Not from instinct, but from memory. The mayor's televised announcement just 2 weeks ago. A pilot program. A new accountability initiative. Mandatory live feeds from every SWAT team's body cams, streamed straight to a rotating panel of civilian watchdogs, independent of police oversight. Real-time, unedited evidence, designed to rebuild public trust. At the time, Jason hadn't paid it much attention. Another bureaucratic gesture, he'd thought. But now it was a loaded weapon sitting right at his fingertips, if he dared to pull the trigger. He understood immediately. These men didn't fear guilt. They didn't fear an apology issued weeks later in a dusty courtroom. They feared exposure. They feared now, being seen, judged, and condemned before they could bury their mistakes under paperwork and press releases. The knowledge gave him strength where despair had threatened to crush him. Summoning every ragged breath left in his battered body, Jason forced his neck to lift under the crushing pressure. His lips, cracked and tasting of blood, formed the words like a loaded gun cocked at the heart of the chaos. "You're being live-streamed to court!" The shout tore through the room like a gunshot. For one impossibly long second, nothing changed. The boot on his back didn't move. The boots of the officers kept pounding across the floor. The overturned furniture lay strewn like corpses across a battlefield. Then a ripple. A jagged, invisible crack through the mob. Voices, tense and uncertain, cut the air. "Confirm the feed. Check the live stream. Is this the right address?" Jason felt the weight shift off his back, not all at once, but in a series of confused, broken motions. The officer pinning him down hesitated, pressure easing, just enough for Jason to suck in a full breath, enough for him to tilt his head and catch a glimpse of the faces behind the masks. Panic. Not righteous warriors, not unstoppable machines. Men terrified of being seen doing wrong. One by one, the SWAT agents faltered. Movements that had been sharp and violent moments before grew awkward, hesitant. Rifles lowered, hands twitched nervously near belts and radios. Jason didn't move. He didn't need to. The words had done their work. Emily's voice, weak, pained, whispered his name, and it ripped Jason's heart anew. He turned his head as the officer who had once slammed her down now reached out with a fumbling hand, lifting her gently, trying to prop her up. Another officer moved toward Jason, murmuring an apology so mechanical, so meaningless, it barely registered. The house still looked like a war zone. The damage was irreversible, but the siege had ended. Not with bullets, but with 5 words that cracked open the lie of invincibility these men carried with them into every home they stormed. And Jason Carter, still bruised and bleeding, understood with perfect clarity. They weren't offering mercy. They were offering damage control. But it was too late. The world was already watching. The sun hadn't yet risen when the first calls were made. Somewhere beyond the wreckage of Jason and Emily Carter's home, the gears of the system, so often slow to move for victims, ground into frantic motion. The live stream footage, once intended as a public relations gesture, had become a sword pointed at the heart of the Minneapolis Police Department. There was no denying what had been captured: the wrong house, the wrong people, a violent assault against a family who had done nothing but open their front door. By noon, an internal affairs investigation was underway. Jason and Emily didn't need to give testimony. The brutal, unedited evidence spoke for itself. It showed the splintered door, the blood on the hardwood floor, Emily's battered figure pinned beneath a stranger's knee, Jason's futile cries swallowed in the chaos. There was no spin that could bury it, no shield thick enough to protect the ones responsible. The SWAT team leader, a man whose name Jason had never known until now, was suspended indefinitely, pending formal charges of negligence and misconduct. The department, cornered by public outrage and media scrutiny, issued a carefully worded statement of apology. But no amount of press conferences could mend the raw truth broadcast across every local news outlet by evening. Jason and Emily's lawsuit didn't just succeed. It shattered precedent. The city agreed to a historic settlement, a figure so large that reporters stumbled over themselves trying to confirm it. But for Jason, the dollar amount was a hollow victory compared to the deeper truth. The world had seen. They hadn't been erased. They hadn't been silenced. In the quiet aftermath, when reporters moved on to the next scandal and lawyers filed the final paperwork, Jason and Emily made a decision that would shape the rest of their lives. They used a large portion of the settlement to establish the Carter Foundation for Civilian Rights, a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring no family would ever again have to rely on blind luck or live feeds to survive an encounter with state-sanctioned violence. They poured their pain into it, hammering it into armor for others who had none. Time healed Emily's bruises, though some scars, emotional and invisible, remained tender long after. But they healed together, rebuilding the house that had been broken, wall by painstaking wall. 7 months after that night, Emily gave birth to a son. Lucas Carter entered the world howling, fists clenched, defiant from his first breath. Jason cradled him with a reverence he hadn't known he possessed, seeing in his son's tiny face a future wrestled back from the brink. Jason, once content to teach equations and quietly fade into the fabric of his small community, now stood taller, sharper, resolute. His classroom lessons became infused with new energy, not just teaching numbers, but teaching resistance, truth, and the unshakable importance of standing up even when your voice is the only one raised. He knew darkness would always find new doors to batter down, but he also knew with unbreakable certainty that there would always be people like him and Emily, ready to stand, ready to fight, and ready to make sure that no scream went unheard again.